Risk Chats with AFERM. I'm your host, Paul Marshall. Today I sit down with Dr. Karen Hardy from the Department of Commerce, and we do a little bit of a retrospective, the last 10 years of federal enterprise risk management. Dr. Hardy is one of the pioneers of this area, so let's settle back, and here's Dr. Hardy. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Today I'm happy to have here Dr. Karen Hardy. Good morning, Dr. Hardy.
Good morning.
So today we're going to talk about 10 years in ERM is our topic, and I know Dr. Hardy, so you have quite a long background with ERM. I want to kind of just start off, just introduce yourself to the audience here and your background in ERM.
Fantastic, Paul. It's great to be here. It's always exciting for me to talk about what we've done in the federal government space. A lot of dedicated public servants passionate about this, but not so much just the passion part, but actually believe in what we're doing. And enterprise risk management has actually served our purpose to ensure that we're managing well, and that's very important to all of us. So I got involved with the firm. I was one of the founding members of the association. From this small group of executives. There were about 5 of us who felt that we shared the same passion at that time. Mm-hmm. This was almost 10 years ago, I think 12 years ago.
Right.
And we just assumed that maybe if we put on an event, maybe someone would show up. And then we got about 100, 150 people show up. And then we felt, well, we may be on to something. And then one thing led to another, and we decided to formalize the vision that we had. Right. So here we are today with an active, engaged, enthusiastic group of professionals sharing the same vision and aspirations for ensuring that government is managed well. And we feel that ERM is the tool and the attribute to use to actually get there.
Right, absolutely. I mean, back then, how many agencies do you think were even doing this?
Just a handful. I think it was because of they were mandated to do so.
Right.
I think where we're trying to go is not be mandated to do it, but make this a natural part of how we manage our business within government.
Right, because ERM was kind of a bigger thing in the financial community, the corporate world, banking world, and all that kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. This is a natural part of financial management.
Yeah, so I think some of the agencies that dealt with that probably were some of the first adopters that had those kind of dealing with financial institutions or things like that.
Yeah, I think they've been pretty much leveraging what they already had in place. The challenge is actually evolving from that, because even with A123 expands beyond the financial management domain. So that takes a little bit more skill and insight that's needed this time around.
Right. Well, let's a couple more things about your background are very interesting. We just want to touch on them really quick, and then we'll kind of get into the next piece here. But so I understand you were actually part of that on the Coso Advisory Council a few years ago. Tell us a little bit about that. I'm just curious.
It was exciting. It was a very exciting moment, but it's a very important moment because often the federal government, policies and standards and things like that are established without our participation. One of the greatest things about that is creating a seat for ourselves at the table during the discussion. Right. And that really was the objective and strategy for me to get involved, was to actually open up that path and opportunity. So moving forward, I'm hoping that when that next round of revision comes up, we're automatically considered to be at the table during the discussion, not just instituting things that are handed down.
Right. No, that's great. And also, you've written a book about ERM?
Yes, Enterprise Risk Management, a Guide for Government Professionals. It's a textbook of first one of its kind. It's actually, it won the award actually for most promising new textbook.
Oh, wow.
And what it does is actually establishes the basic baseline building blocks for having a good conversation of ERM. So it's 10 chapters. These are the topics you will normally talk about if you're going to talk about ERM, and it's a good way to kick it off by using that resource.
Okay. So let's kind of get into the topic here, 10 years of ERM. So about 10 years ago, you wrote a paper, or it was an IBM paper, right?
Yes.
About just kind of the early stages of ERM and what the environment looked like, recommendations to go forward with it, right? And just want to talk about, how were things back then, and how have you seen things change, in the last 10 years? So maybe just kind of starting off, I'm going to actually go over there was 3 major findings. Maybe we just start with that, and then give me your thoughts on that. So one of the first ones was that that you found at that time there was a very much a need to educate the federal workforce on just basic ERM technology and concepts.
Yes, absolutely. That was 10 years ago,
Right.
when this report came up. So now it's great to be able to look back and see what has happened and developed since that time. I think that's still relevant.
Yep.
I mean, at that time, we were dealing with a limited amount of research and practice in government. So I was actually looking at what was happening outside of government and what that could look like in 10 years in the government. So by having this established report and talking about it today. So I think that's one of the things we still have to do.
Right.
We've come a long way, but I think now that the community has grown so much, we can actually, move forward in that area as well.
Right. And do you think, I would think things like AFERM, organizations like AFERM are helping to kind of get the same, standardization around terms and concepts in this world, right? I mean, that's one of the big drivers, right?
Yeah, I think one of the areas we have improved in is that at that time, project risk management was one of the biggest terms being used.
Right.
And there was a confusion around project risk management and enterprise risk management.
Okay, right.
So I think that's a growth spurt for us, and that we've been able to distinguish between those two things, which is very important because project management is not enterprise risk management. It's just one piece of it. How do projects and the success of projects help to actually deliver or improve enterprise risk management? And in terms of the portfolio view, projects are included in that. They support programs. Yeah. But so that's one of the things I think we've been able to accomplish. And the terminology, I think people are much more comfortable with it now. There was a time when they said risk, it was a lot of aversion. But at this point in time, everyone's comfortable using that term and seeing that there's a benefit to actually understand what your risks are.
Right. And something else you had found was that, I guess at that time, the CFOs were not quite as involved. Maybe it was more chief risk officers. Or, how has that evolved?
Well, I think since that report, the CFO community has picked up the mantle to help move this forward. And I think it's going to take, it's a very strong community, so it's going to take that type of support to move it forward. In the initial stages, no, because the ERM terminology or the concept was not then introduced.
Right.
But it was introduced when Dave Mader was at OMB and formally introduced, because some folks did have the idea about instituting that, but it just wasn't, the timing wasn't right. But under Dave Mader's leadership, actually taking that on from that high level in government and then put it into policy, that was a big turning point for the federal government.
Right. So, and then talking about the A123 policy that came out.
Yes. Yes.
And then the A11 discussion.
Exactly.
Too,
well,
right?
there was actually, when I was doing a detailed assignment at OMB at that time, there was the revisions for A123 and A11 were happening subsequently at the same time.
Right.
So that we were able to get the language of enterprise risk management into A11 and language for ISO 31000 into A11. So I worked on that piece and within A123 at the same time. We thought the best strategy at that time was to get it into policy first, so that people first would see it and it wouldn't be a passive conversation. So that was the strategy behind that.
Right.
It wasn't meant to be the final result of what it looks like, but it was a beginning step to, making it grow to where it needs to be.
Right. So, what would you say over the last 10 years? Have you seen that, many agencies, it is the CFO's office that really drives this, or, some places that they do have a chief risk officer in place that may be in a different part of the organization? What have you seen out there?
I've found that it's a combination of all of those things. Okay. It's not a singular person, a singular role or position.
Right.
It's the CFO, it's the CRO, it's the governance structure, it's the risk committee, it's the audit committee, it's the IG. It's an organizational effort. And I don't think any one person is the superhero when it comes to the enterprise risk management. It is a collective organizational effort that needs to take place for this to be successful.
Now, do you feel there's any confusion or, around sometimes internal control group versus the risk management group? They kind of, should it be together? Should it be separate? Does that divide still comes up, right? That question still comes up.
It is some confusion. It's a natural confusion. When you're introducing something that's new within an environment where some things have been established for years, in the financial community, internal controls community for years, so they have time to practice and refine their craft. Enterprise risk management is still fairly new. It's not budget cycles are established. I mean, you already have business processes historically in place.
Right.
So we're trying to define what that looks like. So there's a close relationship between internal control and the risk management community.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how different agencies implement it. You know, some blend them together, some make them totally separate, almost as if, you know, it's nice to have them separate in an independence kind of way, or just a different objective or a different perspective.
Yeah.
It's interesting, yeah.
Well, we don't have a blueprint,
Mhm.
right? But
Right.
we're creating a blueprint as we move forward, which is
Right.
why implementation and practice is very, very important.
Right.
You have to do the work, and then the answers that we're looking for comes out of the practice.
Right. So, and then the third big finding you all had was that, you know, the approach and the success of a program really depended on the agency's risk culture, risk tolerance, you know, the kind of the management's perspective as well. So is that still, I'm assuming that's still true as well?
I think my sense is that when I first started, I was seen as a shadow auditor. I don't think that's the case anymore.
Right.
Okay, I think that was one of the biggest misconceptions, and that has changed, I believe. You still have to define roles and paths within this. It's a huge, you know, animal to actually institute. You still have to define and clarify paths and roles within this space.
Right.
But in terms of the culture, that's important. Risk aversion, that still has people still are risk averse, and probably for very good reason.
Sure.
I don't think that's a bad thing. But in terms of moving the ball forward, sure, they're going to be growing pains.
Right.
And I think we're starting to see some of those things.
Well, and along with that, I mean, would you say, you know, tone at the top is still one of the most important things to really get program either up and going or just staying operational?
Well, you know, it's tone at the top, it's tone in the middle, and it's tone at the bottom.
Tone everywhere.
There's tone everywhere.
Right.
It's an organizational tone. It's an organizational culture.
Right.
All right. I don't. At one time, I did think that if it's not at tone at the top, which is important, you have to have that. But then you have to have. Let's say that all of the appointees leave. That's tone at the top just left.
Right.
Tone in the middle is careers. Folks have to be there.
Right.
So it's something that's, I think, distributed throughout the organization.
Right. Well, and it's also, I mean, I think one of the great things you mentioned to me previously about OMB putting that guidance out was it really, you know, had the agencies do something. They had to do a risk profile, right? So, I mean, at a minimum, they had something to start with, and from there it could grow. But if you were still kind of on the fence and not doing anything, and you may not have that tone at the top, it's kind of difficult to really just get things going.
And that's why I was there. I was sent there to actually, you know, navigate those type of conversations under Dave Mader's great leadership, because that's the type of strategic conversations that were, I can't speak on behalf of OMB, but those are the type of conversations that did take place in terms of what's the best avenue to get this kickstart in the government.
Right.
First, let's get a kickstart, and what's the best avenue to make that happen? So that's what we have now. Now, is it going to remain this? No, I expect more revisions, more practice. This is amazing where we are now versus 10, 12 years ago.
Right.
None of us didn't even exist. So it's just a testament to, you know, where we've come, how far we've come in the work that we have to do.
Right. And would it be fair to say that, I mean, have you seen out there that, you know, maybe some agencies were reluctant to kind of do it, but then once they started, you know, doing it, they realized that there were definitely benefits from this. It wasn't just a paperwork exercise.
Well, yeah, most folks are reluctant if they don't understand, and
It's
that's
an
what
understanding thing.
you need education around things you're not familiar with. So over time, I've realized that that's okay, because you start to understand that you're dealing with human behavior, and folks, just because something's good for folks doesn't mean they want it.
Of course.
Okay, so there's some reluctance in terms of understanding it. In terms of benefits, what I've found is that you're able to bring to the table groups of folks, executives, who what have you, and they have an actual conversation about what they think risk is. Right. And they all come up with different, you know, ideas of what that is. And the challenge then is, these are the people that represent the organization. They have to be on one sheet of music when it comes to what is risk to Paul, what is risk to Karen,
Right.
versus what is risk to us as an organization that Karen and Paul works for.
Right.
Right. And that's one of the benefits of enterprise risk management.
Yeah, and actually that brings something up. I remember doing another podcast way back when with one chief risk officer, and he basically said, agencies have been having these risk conversations forever. This is not new, but now we're actually writing it down and doing something about it. More official, more formalized.
Yeah, you need to capture the decisions being made within your organization.
Right.
In terms of ensuring and maintaining the knowledge base within your organization. There's no track of why did you decide to do that. Okay, we just can't manage risk in our heads. Right. Because that's what we do. But ERM really encourages that verbal conversation, and then also capturing that information, documenting that.
Right.
Okay, because whether we like it or not, there are audits, and you need to actually demonstrate what you're doing.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that, if you don't write it down, you'll never do it kind of thing, too. It's just as basic as that.
Well, there's a lot of assumptions left if you aren't documenting the system. And how do you have a system if you're not documenting?
Right.
They go hand in hand.
Right. So speaking of education and all that, so where would you say we are today versus 10 years ago, as far as ERM skill sets in the community and training material, literature out there?
Well, I can't express more the importance of having more literature, because as proud as I am about my book, it's very important to have other folks contribute literature, because having one book does not create an industry.
Right.
Okay, so you need other people to contribute thought leadership, and we're starting to see even some of my colleagues come up with more literature to help define and understand it, and that's great. And that's where we need to be. So that's an indicator.
Right.
That's an indicator that there's a market, there's a demand, and there's an interest.
Right.
Without those things, this is active. This is just busy work.
Right.
For the most part, we're not trying to do busy work. People in the past were learn as you go. You capture a little bit here and there. Now we have structured learning systems. We have AFERM and workshops and annual summit that takes place, which is excellent. We have partnerships with other organizations, delivering very valuable insights to the broader community. We have interagency groups springing up all over the place. That's including enterprise risk management, fraud, data analytics, KPIs, what have you, cybersecurity. All of these things are springing up, and that's a great sign for a healthy, market and need within the federal space.
Yeah, speaking of books, I know we did a podcast a little while ago on a new ERM book is out there. A lot of the folks in AFERM put it together.
Sure.
So go out and find it. Go out and find Dr. Hardy's book too. But yeah, there's no excuse now, to say I don't understand ERM. We got a lot of literature coming out.
Lots of literature.
And
lots
federal
of literature.
specific, government specific.
Yeah, that never existed. 10 years that was not there.
Right, and now we have 2 or 3 books basically.
Yeah,
at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then go back to that a little bit more about how have you seen collaboration and sharing? What's the trend in that over the last few years? Communities of practice. What kinds of things are you seeing out there?
Very vigorous communities of practice. And people are enthusiastic and engaged. And I think there's a misconception that this is not happening because government is bureaucracy. People don't see the faces and the people behind this.
Right.
They get up every day and they meet and they're, interacting all the time. They're inviting folks from each agency over to your agency to talk about
Absolutely.
it. That's amazing.
Right.
To actually see that. And it's not because OMB told them to do it.
Yeah, that's just kind of came up organically, right?
Yeah, it's very organically. In fact, and I think when I first started the interagency group at my organization, I actually extended the invitation to other folks to be on that call. And I asked them, I said, do you think I should include OMB in the calls? And they thought it was a great idea. At that time, just probably 10 people. That conference call I had turned into the first interagency ERM council.
Oh, wow.
And that council was used to support the case for having ERM in government. I actually shared with Dave Mader that, Yes, we already have an active interagency group, which
Right.
grew out of my organization's conference call.
Mm-hmm.
And that became a key element for supporting the need for having policy.
Right.
Basically, we were saying there's already a group of people doing this, OMB. We just need, a policy to help support what we're doing.
Right. And speaking of policies, and I know that there's also been interest in trying to figure out if there should be some laws around this, or something go to Congress and see if there's something they can do. Do you know much about that effort as well? Or?
I don't know much about that.
Yeah.
This, it was discussed prior before,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I don't know what the status of that
Yeah,
is.
but I know some folks in the firm have talked about that as well, and that might be a nice podcast subject for another day.
Yeah, but I think anything that contributes to ensuring that we're, on par with the other countries doing
Mhm.
this aggressively will be a plus.
So, I am kind of curious your opinion on, since you've seen this for such a long time. What have you seen, just practically speaking? What are some things that work really well? What are some things that may not work so well? What have you seen out there?
For the practitioner,
Yes, yes.
the day-to-day real stuff, collaboration and getting buy-in is important.
Right.
Taking into consideration capacity of
mhm.
execution first before you do
Yeah.
policy.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
you definitely have to do that. That's very important. And then reinforce the fact that what this does is help improve what they're already doing. You're not trying to reinvent the wheel.
Right. And it's just part of the value proposition,
Yeah.
right? So, and I mean, are there things that you've seen that haven't worked so well? Or any pitfalls out there?
Not socializing the idea, not collaborating.
The opposite.
It's just the opposite of everything that I actually said.
Yeah.
That's very important. I've had the privilege of having a trend for doing this for some time,
Mhm.
and actually seeing what works, what doesn't work. And one of the things I can say is that the human factor does play a role.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You're never just speaking of value one time. It's multiple exposures to the message.
Right.
So you want to have a clear message and establish the voice of what does ERM mean, and continue to speak that within the organization.
Right, and because there's only, there is OMB policy, and but that doesn't necessarily apply to every agency, right? And it doesn't
Right.
apply to, it's centered around financial world, budget world. ERM is a much bigger concept, right? It's the whole organization, how you do your job. So
Yeah.
So since you don't necessarily have hard laws or mandates beyond those, it can be easy for this to kind of go by the wayside. So you have to have strong culture of ERM, or strong individuals, passionate individuals, right?
Well, and then it goes back to performance. Suppose OMB never issued it.
Right.
So the world is changing.
Right.
Okay, in general.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the world is changing. So we're no longer part of it's not a local conversation. It's not a national conversation. It's a global conversation that we're a part of. Other governments are going this way.
Right.
And then the expectation is that, well, I'm not going to partner with you unless you understand enterprise risk management. Why would someone do that? I mean, it's going to become an expectation that you do this, and
Right.
even more reason why people want to collaborate and work with you. I think so. I think that's the natural order of things moving forward. ERM is in every industry out there. I don't think you can mention one industry that is not talking about risk management. Right. So government would have to follow suit. The U.S. government would have to follow suit in that.
So let's kind of talk about, now we've talked about 10 years. Now, how about the future? What are some things you think you might be seeing in the future, or what will agencies need to do to maintain success with this? What are some of those areas?
Well, what I envision that the CRO will be at every agency. I mean, I see that actually happening.
Wow.
That would have to happen. Having a more positive role and having a pipeline for having CROs in organizations. Right now, if there's a CRO that vacates, there's no certainty that it'll be filled or
Right.
backfilled. So that's something. Workforce development is going to happen. We
Right.
now have certifications, right?
Yeah.
Skill set competencies that have been identified. So I see the growth of that actually taking place within the government as well. And then sooner or later, if I just had my ideal world,
Right.
you wouldn't have to have a compliance or law or policy to say this is something you need to do. It's just a natural part of what we do.
Right.
Okay, because a lot of the struggle now is compliance, policy,
Mm-hmm.
and we're talking about practice. Okay, things
Right.
that are just simply part of good business and management, and it's part of an organization's performance.
Absolutely. And I mean, I would assume, organizations like AFERM and these communities of practice will continue to grow, and maybe even more specialties, right? Because, for example, so I know we have at least 3 in AFERM right now. We have special communities of practice or interest. We have a cybersecurity one. We have a small agency specific one, and we have a data analytics, which maybe we see, other kind of special areas popping out as well.
Yeah, I think that'll happen too, and that'll be even better, because that means that people are beginning to have the conversation, engage without someone at OMB saying you need to do this.
Right.
You want people to be able to do this and taking the initiative to do this, not something that they're mandated to do. Right. And that's why in the policy is very open, because you don't want to be too prescriptive. So that was one of the strategies. Now, since that policy being in place, you'll see how it works out, so forth and so on, then you make adjustments.
Right.
But the idea is that, okay, this is new for a lot of folks. Let's see if you can make this fit your organization.
Okay, well, Dr. Hardy, this has been great. Any kind of last words here, or again, reflections over the last 10 years for us?
Well, again, it's been an honor being part of the community, and what we've done in such a short period of time is nothing short of a miracle. We work in a very complex industry, and to be able to accomplish what we've done through great leadership, and some of these are emerging leaders, appointed leadership through associations, but the bottom line is that these are public servants who believe in their work, and they believe in that the services and the missions that they work for every day make a difference, and they have the enthusiasm to go out and find ways to make it work. This is what happened when I got involved in and got part of the policy in publishing. Others will come after me to do the same thing, but long term, we feel that this is something worth doing. The taxpayers deserve it, and we're committed to making that happen. So we're hoping that everything flows in, our way, in a positive way, to make this even more prevalent in the government than it is today.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for joining us. I really enjoyed having you here.
Fantastic. Thank you.
That's our show. Thanks for joining us. Check us out at AFERM.org. I have a whole podcast page there full of good stuff for you guys. Of course, the AFERM Summit is coming up very soon. Hope to see you there. We'll be recording a couple podcasts. And we have quite a few more in the queue ready to publish soon. So keep your eye open, refresh that webpage, and listen up for some more exciting podcasts, risk chats from AFERM.